everyone. Welcome to the 135th Mobile Public Affairs Detachment's podcast series, Away from Home. In this series, we're visiting Iowa National Guard veterans and their families to talk about their experiences as citizen soldiers.
Hi, I'm Sergeant First Class Tawny Cruz with the 135th MPAD. I'm here at the home of retired First Sergeant David Crowley and his wife Linda. Dave enlisted in the Army Reserves in 1986 and joined the Iowa National Guard in 1993. He then deployed overseas with the 1st Battalion, 133rd Infantry Regiment 4 times in his military career. So, Dave and Linda, why don't you start by telling me a little bit about yourselves? When did you meet?
1986.
Was that the same year that
Same
you
year.
enlisted? Okay, so you were with him when he was kind of making that decision?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't part of that decision.
No. Oh, okay.
But I threw the big party for him before he left.
That's true.
A surprise party, no less.
Yes. I joined for a lot of reasons for her. Not specifically, but I was broke and I needed money, and we had met, and we kind of hit it off, and so I needed the money. So I joined sort of to keep being somebody worthy, I guess. Sorry, I didn't interrupt.
So, yeah, that was a journey that you somewhat entered into together, and so you've always kind of been a part of that journey for him then and kind of been that support. Let's start with maybe the first deployment. Just to remind us again, where you went, and at that point, did you have your kids at all, or was it just Linda here back at home?
The first one was in 2000. Katie would have been 12 and Sean was 10 when I got deployed. And Sean was very angry, did not understand what was going on, wouldn't talk to me on the phone for very long, until sort of at the back end of the deployment. I was gone about 5 months. And this is pre-9/11. Technology was such that phone calls were really the only way, and letters. So that's how we communicated. But and we tried to coordinate phone calls, of course, but email wasn't really as big a thing then. But that's how we communicated, and it was just her. She had help from family, but I always say it's much harder on the families when the soldier deploys than it is on the soldier, because despite whatever job I'm doing, when I'm done, I don't have to go mow the lawn or cook dinner or take someone to soccer practice. And so that's when we found that out. But yeah, it was a rough go for Sean for sure. Katie was a little bit better adjusted.
Can you describe how things were, just from your perspective, Linda, on that first deployment?
Both of our families were in Cedar Rapids, so I had a lot of assistance with the kids if I needed it. But we stayed really active, so that was a big time for our kids to be like in sports and scouts, and kind of that preteen era where they're like learning their own independence. So it was an interesting time.
And I do remember it was really important to me to go, probably selfishly. I will remind you too that after I got home, you told me you cried almost every day.
I did.
Yeah. And that was shocking to me, because here, my impression was, they're getting along fine and they're doing okay. And yeah, that was hard to hear.
That speaks a lot, I think, to, again, just the resources that were available to you at the time on that very early deployment. Like you had mentioned, the communication methods were very limited. And so I think maybe that was part of it. I won't dare to say that maybe subsequent ones, like later in the years, might have been easier, like the 2010 one. Not easier per se, but maybe it was a little bit less stressful at those times because you had more communication. Am I on track there, or was it
access to communication, ease of communication evolved as I deployed, to the point where when I was in Afghanistan, I had my own cell phone that I could call home.
He could call us, but we couldn't call him. So, like, I would have to send an email that said, please call home. We have something important to tell you, or the kids need to say something to you. And so it was always that kind of delay in the communication process. But, I mean, you make it work. It's what you got. So
The having to wait.
yeah. Yeah. So the kids couldn't, like, I got to call Dad. I'm like, well, we can't.
Yeah, well, when they're younger, too, they just have a concept that you're gone. They don't have a concept that you're halfway around the world. It's
That's when I got my little tiny globe.
Yeah.
So I told the kids, I want a globe so I can show you where Dad is. And so they got me this little tiny globe. Of course, you know, I still have it. But, I mean, that helped just process, this is where we are. This is where Dad is.
So I think some people, especially those who aren't from like a military background, might have a perception that deployments and spending all that time away from home is more based in the active duty world. You know, some people might think of the National Guard and think deployments don't really happen. You know, you're not really having to spend all this time away from your families. It's just, you know, one drill a month. So maybe could you talk a little bit about that? Because obviously, you know, especially in your experience, Dave, that proved to be not so true. You know, you spent plenty of time away from home on deployments. So maybe talk a little bit about why the perception might be there.
Yeah, well, for sure, like the first 15 years of my career, deployment was not a thing for the National Guard. That Saudi Arabia deployment was the first the state had done since Desert Storm, and even then, they just assembled a couple of units and sent them somewhere for pre-deployment. This was the first time Iowa was actually preparing a unit to go out the door here in the state. So there were literally no family programs to speak of back then. There was no briefing for families. There was no, they had a concept of family readiness group. I guess I'll let you speak to that.
That got better. I mean, I did the newsletter.
Yep.
So got pretty active in that. So they brought a lot of people in to help us make family phone lines and try to touch base with family members that were here to be sure that they were doing okay. Did they have questions about what was happening? You know, if there was, you know, activities that were going to be happening, you know, so that they could get involved too. And, you know, what the unit was doing locally, events for families to come, and we did the newsletter and tried to keep that as informative. I had a little section called the First Sergeant's Corner. So I made him submit a little ditty every time we put that out. And we would send pictures and, you know, pictures from the family events, pictures from what was happening with the soldiers. And so it was just a way for, you know, people to connect. We had created a little website. So I think that was helpful. And I was really active in that. So I think that helped me. And I think that helped me prepare more for when you did go to Iraq. At that point, you know, a lot of people were really anxious about when are our soldiers coming home? And I was trying to take a leadership role from a family perspective of we are not in control of that. Our soldiers will be safe and they will come home when they're released. So don't get hooked up in they're coming at this time, because they might not come at this time.
So maybe that's a good time to maybe then talk about how you as a family would prepare in the months leading up to a deployment. You know, were there intentional things that you would both take and steps that you would take to prepare yourselves and your children for that?
People don't understand sometimes leadership comes on way ahead of the deployment. So especially for Iraq, I was on duty 4 or 5 months before deployment, before we left. My focus then especially for Iraq and Afghanistan, was pre-deployment. And I didn't do a good job of recognizing being present here, to the point when I told Linda that we were going to Afghanistan, she said, okay, I'm in, but I need you to do me a favor. And I said, what? And she said, I need you to be here until you leave. She knew I had responsibilities, but she needed me to not check out. And so I feel like that was a pretty good wake-up call, that I had done it badly the first 3 times. And I did it a little better, I think. But, you know, you have a lot to get ready for. And that was one thing I wish if I could go back, I wish I would have done better. Sean told me this once, that it was so much a part of his life, he didn't really realize that other people didn't go through that. Dad was leaving again. It was just kind of like, well, yeah, that's how it goes. It took him a long time to realize that that was not a normal sort of situation.
Just for us.
For us, yeah. Yeah.
So I know that Iraq deployment, you know, maybe stands out more than some of the others because of just the amount of time that you were gone. Can you maybe just talk a little bit about that deployment specifically? You know, just as a whole, like the time maybe leading up to it, during, you know, when you found out that you were going to have to extend, and the effects that it had on both of you.
Yeah. So the Iraq deployment was my first combat deployment. The Saudi Arabia deployment and the peacekeeping mission in Sinai were literally we weren't expected to experience any combat. But for going to Iraq, we knew this was going to be a combat deployment. And so the preparation was different. The training time was different. Back then it was 6 months. Any brigade took 6 months of pre-deployment training and then a year with boots on the ground. And so that was our expectation. And then in January of 2007, when we were really just starting to get into preparations to come home, we got extended. Somehow word of our extension got out to Minnesota families before we had even gotten orders that we were going to be extended. And needless to say, that created a lot of controversy. I think most of us kind of knew, in Iraq anyway, most of us kind of knew that there was a good chance that they would keep us in Iraq and we could get extended. But the way it went down was hard. Families were getting the information that we were being extended and soldiers didn't know anything about it. Some soldiers weren't, you know, in denial about getting extended. So that was hard. It was a hard public relations problem. It was a hard morale problem. My company commander and I decided that he would take the officers and I would just take all the enlistment. And we met in the motor pool and I just told him what happened. And when we finally did get orders, I told him what happened with the miscommunication. And I said, you know, ask your questions. Ask me anything. And they did. And there was a lot of vented frustration and there was a lot of anger, and justifiably so, I think. After we were sort of done and we were sort of mingling around, I was standing with a group of soldiers and one of the youngest soldiers in our company said, well, at least I don't have to go to prom. And I said, what do you mean? And he said he had gotten married to his high school sweetheart before we left, and the plan was to get home in March and then go to prom right after, and he did not want to go. And so that kind of provided me perspective that, you know, hey, silver lining out of everything. I'll never forget the look on his face, how happy he was he didn't have to go to prom. But besides that, it was hard because we spent another 4 months in Iraq that were not scheduled. And I know it was hard. I missed Katie's high school graduation because of it. I don't know if she's ever really spoken to me about that disappointment. But I know she was incredibly disappointed that I wasn't going to be there, and I wasn't. And the worst part about it is on the day of the graduation, the phones had been shut down. So I was not able to call when I promised I would call. And I wasn't able to call for 2 more days. And there's no way to let anybody know that, so that was further disappointment.
My saving grace, and whether it's good or not, I kind of compartmentalize. I would say, promise me you will be safe. You will come home. I'm going to do my job and my things, and I'm going to take care of the kids, and we'll be safe on our end. And then I just would not think that anything bad was happening to him or that he was in any danger, regardless of what you were doing. But that's what helped me get through all of that, too. I just closed it out of my head. It was nothing bad was going to happen. So.
Do you remember giving the news to your kids?
No, I don't. There's a lot of things that I just don't recall because of probably doing that. I just put it in a nice little box and I just, jink, just put it in the back of my head so I wouldn't have to deal with it either. Just, kind of suppress some of those emotions that I too did not want to have to deal with. And, because I had a job to do.
Linda does a great job of being hyper-focused, like she said. Like I said, I don't know if I was very good at communicating all the time. But in Iraq, I sort of had a job where I had a kind of unlimited access to email. And I spent a lot of time sending emails to her and tried to make sure that we touch base. Our schedules would sometimes line up so that we can instant message. That was the new technology then. And so I thought I was killing it. I thought I was doing a great job. And I got an email from her one day, and she sent me this email, and it started off with, "I know you're busy, but I see that you're able to manage your fantasy football team and do other things online, and we need to hear your voice." And I had not called home at that point, probably 4 months, because I thought I was communicating well enough with the emails and the instant messaging. And it was a very pointed email that I was not doing a good job. And then from there, I would call home every couple of weeks. And I think that went a long way toward making her feel better. and the kids then again got to talk to me and got to hear my voice. I had underestimated that the significance of that personal contact.
Well, that makes it real.
Yeah. And I just didn't factor that in. I thought since I was communicating that was enough. And it clearly wasn't. We had learned one of the best lessons we got, one of the very best piece of advice that we got on the first deployment was the phone can be a little bit of heaven and a whole lot of hell. And what that means is you have to have a plan with that. Because as like in Afghanistan, some folks had the opposite problem because they were talking every day to their families. There was these conversations that were going nowhere, and that could be the little bit of hell, or a whole lot of hell. And so we had a good plan about trying to call every couple of weeks, trying to make sure I called on dates that, a birthday or, the holidays. Obviously, everybody wants to call home on Christmas and Thanksgiving and things like that, but we made sure that we tried to plan those so that would happen when I could talk to everybody. And again, not probably very original, but we had a better plan, especially after I got the wake up email. Like I would tell people not to do some of the things I did, which was leave too early, and I don't mean physically, I mean checking out mentally. Remember that, that you haven't left and you still need to be a significant part. And then have a plan. Have a plan for how you're going to do those things. Again, the phone plan. How much are you going to try to talk? What are you going to make sure you talk about? That is especially now that communication is so much easier. We had restrictions at least on the first 3 deployments and not so much on the last one. But now I in my experience since then is, make sure you have a plan. I would also tell people to be involved in their family support units in some way. I think that helped you a lot in the last 2 deployments, whereas not so much in the first.
Well, I did deployment dogs.
Oh, yeah.
So not very popular. So, yeah, Dave was not a fan. So when he left, I got my first wiener dog. It was for the kids.
For sure, only for the kids,
Only for
right?
the kids, yeah. It was for the kids. Though they loved that dog. And then my dad loved that dog just as much as the kids did. So then my dad got a wiener dog. And then Dave went on deployment again, and Well, they had two little wiener dogs at the pet store, and I couldn't separate them, so we got two more.
Naturally.
Yeah.
So now I have a herd of little wiener dogs, and you were so angry with me for doing that. I was like, how could you do that before I'm leaving? I'm like, because you're leaving. What do you care?
By the way, I don't hate dogs. I just
Make that clear.
I really, I didn't want her to have one more thing to deal with. And, you know, as couples sometimes do, she heard one thing and I thought I said something and she heard another. And I thought I had told her I thought it was a bad idea and you shouldn't do it. And I thought that was where we ended. And then we had two dogs. And so it's not that I hated the dogs. The dogs were great. I was really angry that she was going to take on two more things in this case. But it turned out great. Yeah. The kids
loved it.
Especially since they were almost 3 years old by the time I got back. So, like, at the end of the day, I'm fine to be done with it, but I think that it made us stronger, both as a couple and a family in the long run, and appreciative. I think when you go through as many as we went through in the time that I spent away, which was significant and maybe as, you know, more significant than many, is that eventually you kind of have to learn to survive and thrive. You know, a lot of love too. You know, she knows I love her and we love each other, but being able to communicate those things while on deployment, which is sometimes technologically hard, is a way you find, you know, to get stronger and to be a part of each other's lives. I wouldn't want to do it again, but I don't regret any of it. Because I think it made significant impact in a good way, even though there were definitely,
we are now.
Yeah, even there were definitely really tough times. To have a plan, make sure you, from a soldier's point of view, make sure that your family knows how to deal with, you know, those things.
And resources that are available.
Well, that's my job now, so I would be remiss if I didn't say tap into those resources. You know, don't go it alone. The first deployment was probably really hard on her because she went it alone. And don't go it alone. Find friends, find family that you can lean on. That's the time to lean on family and friends, is when you're going through that.
Thank you for listening to the 135th MPAD's podcast series, Away from Home. If you enjoyed hearing this story, make sure to check out more of our content on Facebook and Instagram.